Hello everyone and welcome to Pastor's Library. This is the channel where we discuss everything to do with theology books. Books that might be on a reading list for a seminary course, for a bachelor's or a master's degree in biblical studies or theology. Or perhaps it's just simply books that have piqued your interest either on a website or even sat in your own pastor's office. If you like what we have to say today, please remember to leave us a thumbs up and click subscribe and click on the bell if you haven't done already. It all helps the algorithm and we're very grateful for your support for the channel. Thank you so much. Today I want to talk about what I think is probably a pretty essential book, and it's just come out in its, wait for it, 11th edition. This is a guide to biblical commentaries and reference works, the 11th edition by John F. Evans. This is quite a remarkable book. Any book that becomes into its 11th edition is remarkable. It tells you that people want it, people buy it. I imagine it's the sort of thing people might buy one every other upgrade that comes out. But this is a well-recommended book by Gary Burge, by John Walton, Jane Heath, who's the assistant professor at Durham University, which is quite near to me. These are a good, solid people who are recommending this as a useful guide for all students or readers, or particularly people with a heart to know what is out there. And there are hundreds and hundreds of commentaries out there, and this is probably the definitive guide. There are other ones, and I've dealt with some of them on other videos, but this one is pretty much as detailed as you can get, and it offers an awful lot. So if you're looking for, let's say you're wanting to do some reading in Matthew, then you just turn to Matthew in here and it will list you to start with what are probably regarded as the top half dozen or so. And if it's got a star against them, it recommends that you should buy them. And it then has ones that are quite profound in bold. By that, what I mean is, if he's quoting what he believes is a leading commentary that's influential, the author's name is in bold. If it's a star which is hollow, so white on the inside, it's a worthwhile purchase, but not a first priority. The first priorities are a solid black star. If it's got an F against it, it's a forthcoming volume. And there are some other symbols in this book, which I have to say, I don't think are quite as well situated as they could be. It's near the front, it's on one page, but I sort of think that it's the type of idea that you should be drawn to more clearly, because I was reading through this for ages before I worked out what the bold type was for example. I should have said, well, I should have seen that, but I didn't. And I think it just needs to be probably a little bit more obvious. It's got a list of abbreviations of all the different series. In his own introduction, it has an idea of where he's coming from theologically. It also it tells us quite definitely what his history of his ministry is. And he says that he describes himself as evangelical, Catholic with a small c, and Reformed with a capital R. And he tells us about his ministry experience. I have to say that the fact that he is open about his churchmanship and his experience and how he describes himself is terrifically helpful, because it's quite easy then to recognise any filters you need to apply. And I have to say I didn't really have much of a problem adapting to this volume at all, because he was so forthcoming initially with his own, if you like, filters that he applies. So this is a truly great book. It is 558 pages. this has just come into my hands, so it is a 2025 publication. This is a Zondervan publication, which gives you an element of this is not to be trifled with. Zondervan don't just print anything. It is a very worthwhile book, I would say. Now, to give you a feel for this and let you know how it sort of works, what I did was I turned immediately to John's Gospel to see what it said about that. And it starts with this list of works which significant, influential commentaries that all have a solid star against them. And there are some well-known names here. There's C.K. Barrett, there's Gary Burge, Donald Carson, which I do have to say is referring there to the Pillar commentary, and he is clearly a Carson fanboy, and that comes over so much. He mentions Carson in so many different spheres, and he clearly recognises him as a profound thinker. He mentions Craig Keener's 2 volumes from 2003, and I thought this was quite amusing actually. He says, perhaps Keener is too full for the pastor, 1600 pages. As with his huge commentaries on Matthew and Acts, this is long on historical, cultural and ancient history background. He adduces too many supposed parallels in my opinion, but I don't complain. Here's the breakthrough for you, Mr. John Evans. You just did complain. But I have to say to you, I think he did this in the most appropriate manner. But it made me laugh when I read that. And anything that makes me laugh, I quite like. So this goes on to talk about, for example, Michael J. Ramsey's New International Commentary on the New Testament from 2010. And he says how that replaced Morris's volume, and yet it became a bigger volume than Morris. And I suppose really what he's trying to say is, does everything have to get bigger with new volumes? I recognise that, but if there is more detail, then I think it does make the book better value. So as you go through this, you will find lots of references to people you know. For example, he puts in a lot of references to Richard Bauckham in John. He mentions the Gospels for all. He mentions the testimony of the beloved disciple. He mentions Jesus and the eyewitnesses, the Gospels as eyewitness testimony. And then Gospel of Glory, major themes in Johannine theology, all of which are to do with John's Gospel, and a few other things too. So basically, as you work through this, you will see references to things that may influence your buying habits and may give you ideas for further research. If, for example, you're a student and you've got access to your university's library online, this is a godsend just to have this book, because you might well find everything else that you want. When I look through this, I do see commentaries that I think, yeah, I don't think I would want that one. But then I find other ones which I think, well, why haven't I ever come across this? And so it is quite profound. He goes from Bruner to Bultmann. He goes from Murray Harris to Andreas Kostenberger. Everything, and these are all about John. It's quite a few pages, but it is giving you pretty much the definitive, excellent view that you might need. And when it gets to Ben Witherington III, Ben is in bold, so he's an influential commentator. His book on John's Gospel is John's Wisdom, a commentary on the Fourth Gospel from 1995. And that's a book that I've always been a fan of. And I'm presuming that he hasn't given it a star because at 1995 it is now 30 years old and perhaps not ideal for seminary students who are writing essays for quotability. But he'll go back to Calvin. In fact, he'll go back further than Calvin. So he is really giving you everything that he is aware of. And that has got to be helpful. And when you've got a man of his age and experience putting together this and updating it over the years and re-releasing it in latest versions, I think that is a real asset. And whereas my theology might differ to his, my worldview might differ, he's certainly got something to offer, and because he's upfront about his theology, it's easy to filter through it. So I looked at 1 Corinthians in here, mainly because I'm currently still preaching my way through the book, and it talks about Craig Blomberg's Naivac, talks about Roy Kemper's 2010 Pillar, and Gordon Fee's 1987 revised 2014 New International Commentary on the New Testament, as well as lots of others, David Garland, Anthony Thistleton, Paul Gardner. And I look at these and I think all of these, I think actually, yes, I have got all of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, what he calls the profound, the ones that you should definitely buy. And I like that because some of these definitely don't fit in with his theology. So Evans is clearly much more even-handed than he might explain himself as being, because you can see it in his recommendations. And he's got everything in here from, Barrett to Bruce to Dunn. This, to my mind, is an excellent section, his section on 1 Corinthians. I was very chuffed to see when I turned to Ephesians that there is a one-line entry, David Gerard's Width and Stock commentary that came out in 2023, which I bought because I know David and I appreciated his lectures when I was at Bible college, and I have to say I was chuffed that it got in here, but the entry is this: a brief Width and Stock commentary. You deserved more than that, David. But as you go through this, you will see lots of impactful, insightful comments on a number of books that you may never have come across if you'd been looking in a million years, but with this book you are taken straight to them. I looked at the section on Revelation, and on one page here there are 2 consecutive books, one of which I talk about as my absolute favourite commentary, Revelation, which is Gordon Fee's New Covenant commentary series from 2010, which that is brilliant. And the one that I always tell people is, don't dismiss this. This is my accidental discovery, and that's Austin Farrer's 1964, The Revelation of St. John the Divine. And whereas it's maybe not the most up-to-date technically in terms of research, it has some insight which I have yet to see in anywhere else really. Some insight particularly to do with astronomy. And I think that to see those two listed together on the same page sort of rang my bell. If we carry on with the book, it doesn't just list commentaries. It has insight into a number of other Old Testament, New Testament books that are good. And then it also moves on to an ideal basic library for the pastor. And I think with this, he's tried to look at books that are more budget orientated. And these are on page 523 to 526, I think. And they are an idea of things that you could buy that are not too expensive. He also lists things that are available free online, which can't be a bad idea, can it? I thought that whereas some of his lists are a little bit more reformed than I would have liked, the fact is some of them are very fair indeed, and I found them excellent. If you go to his ultimate reference library, he puts this at the heading of it. He says, "An unfortunate fellow once quipped, 'If my ship ever comes in, there's sure to be a dock strike,'" which I like that idea. He goes on and he says that he has attempted to put together a list of books that he'd buy if money was no object. He has some great titles in here, and I have to say his ultimate list, I really sync with that. I think it's very good. He's got some great people in there, some great theologians. It then ends with a huge index of names, And I have to say, I can't remember how much I've just paid for this, but if you look online, it's really quite reasonable. A Guide to Biblical Commentary and Referent Works, 11th edition. It's paperback, but it's very good. And being Zondervan, you're pretty safe. It's been through a lot of ringers before it's got to you. So I would suggest to you, what's really good about this is, if you had this one book and you have an online library access, you could get hold of virtually everything while you're studying on this. And that would, to my mind, this would have been a brilliant thing if I'd had it when I was at uni. And if not, this gives you a great point of reference to study what commentaries might be important to you. For example, if it's quite clear that it's a Reformed commentary and you come from a Reformed background and you like reading Reformed stuff, then that might help you decide to purchase something. And the other ways are true too. For example, there's a great review given for the Philippians version of the New Beacon Bible commentary, and he speaks really well of it. But he does say, actually, this is the only one of them I've ever seen, which is fair enough. But more people need to see the New Beacon Bible commentary range because I think it's very good. So that's it for today. I recommend this book highly. And if you like what I've had to say today, remember to leave us a thumbs up. Also remember to subscribe and click on the bell if you haven't done already. And I hope you'll have a great time till next week. And until then, all I've got to say to you is bye!